Welcome to a special Liberal Conversation series of the Dissidents podcast. In this series, we invite guests who have resources, ideas, and viewpoints that will challenge us to reflect on liberal values, what they are, how they are applied, their impact on us as individuals, and why they matter for the larger communities in which we live. The Dissidents podcast is brought to you by the Institute for Liberal Values, a nonpartisan and non-sectarian consortium focused on the promotion of individual freedom, rights, and liberty in everyday life.
Hi, welcome to the Dissidents Podcast Liberal Conversation series. And today we have as our guest Brandy Shufutinsky. And Brandy is a social worker, a writer, and a researcher. She holds a doctorate in education and a master's in social work. She has been an advocate for the rights of victims and survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, particularly in the military community. She's Director of Education and Community Engagement for the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values, and her current focus is the development of intercultural and academic opportunities to enhance liberal democratic ideals. And that's the focus, the main focus of our conversation today, right? Because Brandy has very generously offered her time to teach a class through the Institute for Liberal Values. And I want to give you, as much time as you need to talk about that, maybe your motivation and your interests, and also some of maybe enough of the details so that people can figure out whether they might want to sign up.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Elizabeth. It's really cool talking to you today. So what inspired me to do this class that I'm very grateful Institute for Liberal Values is willing to host is the idea of how do we improve academic outcomes, which has been kind of a consistent problem or concern over the past few decades. And a lot of different things have been attempted and tried to whether that's increasing access to certain opportunities or whether that's taking some away, as I think we're currently seeing with a lot of the elimination of certain academic standards in programs for kids who excel in specific subjects. One thing that I think hasn't been discussed enough is to improve the outcomes is actually improving communication. So it's well known in the field of education that there are multiple ways that students learn. And we have talked about, some students are more of hands-on learners, some students are visual, some are audio, but we don't really talk about what it means for communication. And so I've been interested in approaching the field of education and learning with the idea of, working towards improving intercultural communication and understanding as a learning tool. And so the course that I'm going to be offering is building those tools, and then using those same skills that are built to really focus on ethnic studies.
And so who is the target audience? Who would somebody like, so I'm a college professor. Would I get something out of this? Is this K through 12, all of the above? Parents, I don't know.
No, all educators, anyone who's actually interested in learning and also discussing and contributing to the conversation about improving the communication skills in order to work on and build on and improve academic outcomes would benefit from this. And also the class would benefit from having multiple perspectives on that idea and that topic being part of the discussion.
So what will be the format of this, and how might people sign? I mean, we'll put whatever links you want us to put in the podcast notes, but just tell us a little bit about the format and how people would be expected to progress through the class.
Sure. So the sign up will be on the ilv.org website, and I'm sure you can put that in the podcast notes. But it'll be 4 sessions, an hour long evening time. We're looking at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Those times may change or adjust a little bit depending on a couple of logistical things, but that'll all be on the ILV website. And so the course will have a little bit of, at home reading material or video
Homework?
to look at. Yeah, a little bit of homework, but not so much homework, but it's looking more to build a certain a basis to have fundamental guiding questions that get discussed throughout the sessions and make sure that everyone is kind of discussing the same things, but from different lenses.
So when I was reading some of the things you sent me for my homework for this podcast, I was, there's some like sort of, I don't want to say buzzwords, might be an old fashioned term, but I noticed some things. So again, I'm a college professor, and I know that your focus, is, all of education. And so, but I have never been in the K through 12 system. So I don't really know. I know only what's going on, in my own world. But I noticed some things that, that resonated with me, which is this focus on sort of, that DEI consultants are required in order to build sort of a culture of belonging. That's becoming, that's where the funding is linked and everything, but also just the notion that we need a DEI program or a DEI consultant to to have a sense of belonging. When I don't know, my personal experience growing up and, in the college classroom, I'm not really seeing how a consultant can, maybe they can help us build belong. I haven't seen any evidence of it yet. And so, so that really resonated with me. Sort of these, the requirements that are tied to funding in the schools, and also this idea of, you didn't use these words or anything, but less nuance now and more clear categories. And I was thinking about, in psychology, we talk about like, is an ostrich a bird? This is sort of like categorical thinking. Is an ostrich a bird? Well, yeah, sort of. Is a penguin a bird? Yeah, sort of. And this sort of this idea of fuzzy sets, like what's your typical bird? People might say a robin. When I moved to New England, they said seagull, which I thought was odd. I was like, really? That's your prototypical bird? But I think that in most of our lives, we cope with fuzzy sets pretty well and are okay with this sort of nuance of diversity in the rest of our world. What is it about either contemporary culture or maybe the DEI movement, or what's your sense? I know you don't know if we knew the answer, we'd all be rich, right? But what's your sense of what's going on, with your focus in social work and education and stuff?
I think that that one, I'm not quite sure that people actually do well with nuance and with the fuzzy sets. I think that people gravitate towards what they can understand and what they can define, what they can understand in their own terms. So when something comes and it presents something that would question that their sense of what's right or what's wrong, or being able to define something, I feel like people kind of tend to shun it. So there's this gravitation towards sameness, which to me is one of the things at the heart of the problem with DEI, that the name doesn't fit the action, that
Mm-hmm.
it's actually not diverse, it's not equitable or equal, and it's not inclusive. It's actually the opposite from what I've seen, unfortunately, in many DEI programs. So diversity of outward appearance, but not diversity of what's inside. Um, Equitable only if it's meeting a certain bar. So usually in the field of education, K-12 education, at least, that it tends to be the lowest bar. Not equity of access to giving students the opportunity to actually push themselves and excel. And inclusion of only people who may say or things or think like a very narrow, specific set of the population. And so that desire for sameness seems to provide a level of comfort for a lot of people that are unfortunately implementing a lot of DEI programs.
Yeah. So it's so interesting, isn't it? I hadn't really thought about it that way, but think about, like, is a tomato a fruit or a vegetable? And I don't, maybe you're right. Maybe people decide for themselves. It's like, well, I'm just going to call this a vegetable. If I don't have any other vegetables on my plate, if I'm having spaghetti sauce, I'm going to call that a vegetable. And if if I haven't had any fruits today, I'm going to call it a fruit or whatever. And then maybe, I mean, I was thinking to myself, oh, well, people sort of are comfortable with those sort of, uncertainties, and sort of they laugh it off or whatever. But I also think you're absolutely right that people, because in part of our lazy thinking, we do gravitate towards clear, categorical things. And when somebody comes along and says, here's some categories you can use, they're like, oh, okay, great. I'm going to use that, and I'm going to apply it maybe a little too broadly. So one of the main things, again, that I noticed in what you've written is really about intellectual diversity and living a purposeful life was one of the things that, again, sort of resonated with me, and how freedom begins with what you teach. That was another, or what we teach, I guess, is what we teach our children, and I don't know a lot about the Jewish religion, but one thing that I personally have experienced is just the welcoming nature and the appreciation for that intellectual diversity, and it makes me sad that I see it leaving. I see it being diminished at all levels, including, at the college level. And it made me sad to read about even, private schools sort of, that it's being diminished. It surprised me when I read what you wrote about that. And it made me really sad. And I felt your sadness when I read that piece.
Oh, thank you. I think that there's a couple of things you said that you said that caught my ear. People, again, and this is a lot of this discussion is obviously very much related to how we see and do things and experience things here in the United States. So I want to
Right.
mention that. But being Jewish is more than a religion. Jews are an ethno-religious group of people, and because of that, it's difficult, I think, for some people, including a lot of Jewish people, to understand what that means related to culture and heritage and traditions. And so, thinking about how there's Jewish tradition of debate and open discourse and diversity of thought, and that's getting chipped away. And it's not getting chipped away because of Jewishness. It's getting chipped away because of sameness. And I think yeah, I do feel a sadness in that, especially when I see that happening so often in Jewish institutions, whether they're religious or educational or cultural, that there's this shunning of actually celebrating the diversity of our ancient ethno-religious group of people.
And again, another sort of term that you used was progressive bigotry, which really resonated with me. I don't know if you could say a little bit more about your definition of progressive bigotry.
Say a lot about that. There's and I'm using progressive actually not in the way that we would traditionally think that any definition would apply to that term. I'm using it in how it's been politicized by people who label themselves progressives and by people who rally against progressives. The idea that there's only one way to be anything, whether that's one way to be Black, one way to be a girl or a woman. Those ideas, from where I sit, come from an ideology that should be the complete opposite of progressive. When I was growing up, being progressive meant that there are multiple ways to be a person. There isn't, if you speak a certain way that or act a certain way, that isn't speaking white or acting white. That's something that people that historically held very anti-progressive viewpoints, that comes from a position of racism and bigotry, to say that, well, all Black people are this horrible bad thing, and if you're the good thing, then you're actually, you're not really Black. And we're hearing those types of things come from people who self-label as progressive. That's been at the root of it is bigotry, it's prejudice. And I think to discount that is doing our society a disservice.
So I did not reread this article, but just totally by accident this morning, I saw in the Boston Globe an article, and I did pull up this report, and then I can talk for just a second about the research study, which I've read but didn't reread this morning. This seems to me to be a potential example, only this is in the workplace, and then I'll give you the education example. So this is a recent survey by a company called Textio. And they're talking about who gets what kind of feedback in the workplace. Okay. And so they talked about the amount, it's the amount of feedback. So women got over 100% of the feedback. Men got 99%. So basically men and women, there's no significant difference there, obviously, in the amount of workplace feedback, job performance feedback that people got. Asians got 100, whites 100%. Again, no difference at all. Latino, 88%, blacks, 81%. Now, they're of course calling, they're saying that obviously this is biased, it's holding people back. I don't disagree with that. I think that it would be holding people back if they didn't get, good feedback. In a recent psychological journal, I say recent, maybe 2017 or something like that, they did a similar kind of thing where they had both students and college professors evaluate an essay, the same essay. Sometimes the essay was the name on the essay indicated a particular group, male, female, other kinds. I mean, obviously, racial and ethnicity signals in the name. Okay, exactly the same essay. When it was a what you would consider a traditional minority name, whether it was a student or faculty member, people gave higher performance evaluations and less quality feedback. And I see that not only as, obviously it's racist, right? But it's also, I feel as a professor, so this is my feeling, okay, that it's partly this progressive bigotry, right? That it's a version of that we're afraid that we're, especially, and more so recently. So I think that study was like 2017. We're now in 2023. I am running scared all the time. I'm concerned all the time about the way that something that I say might be interpreted or the feedback that I give. And I do think that I find myself holding back from giving even negative feedback that would be important to hear because of, concerns that I'll be, called a name or whatever. Somebody will go to my department chair and complain or whatever. It feels like no stone can be left unturned to find, racism or other kinds of bias. And I don't know how you can have a good education if that's happening. Just like a good, how can people get promoted if they don't get quality feedback? How can students, be prepared for whether it's college or work or just the next grade level if they're not getting quality feedback? And is it possible that this kind of DEI, this kind of stuff, that's the technical term, do you think it could be contributing?
I mean, what you describe is the bigotry of low expectations. I don't expect these people to be able to perform at the level I can perform at because they're not as smart, not as hardworking, not as dedicated as I am. So I'm going to take that into consideration and not give them feedback. They're too fragile to hear that, oh, they made a mistake.
I think it's the fragility, at least for me. Like, I'm concerned that somebody's going to, like, use some kind of bias reporting system to, accuse me of being too hard on someone or whatever. But I agree about the low expectations. Also, yeah.
No, I mean, I would be concerned. We've seen it. We saw it with professors that have had their jobs threatened or their careers threatened because they've done their jobs, which is teaching. Feedback from a professor to me isn't negative. It's exactly what's supposed to happen. There, in the situation between an educator and a student, there is an expert and there is somebody who is learning. To pretend that dynamic isn't true, isn't there, or that it shouldn't exist, will lead to a nation of fools. There are people that have expertise. Expertise doesn't need to be denigrated, and it doesn't need to be made into some type of white supremacist monster just because there's a dynamic where there is an expert and there's a learner. That's the point of learning and going to school. And to take that away from students isn't helping anyone, which I think is my main issue with it, that all of these types of policies get put in place claiming that they're helping Black students or brown students or BIPOC students or whatever the term of the day is to describe students, but in fact it's actually harming them, and that's the issue I take. So there is a district, a public school district in Northern California that a couple years ago, I don't remember exactly what year, maybe 2019, I can't recall, that eliminated their ninth grade honors classes in the name of DEI. And this is being done in multiple districts and multiple schools around the country, and people need to be aware of that. That these advanced courses are being eliminated in the name of equity. The people doing the eliminating are school administrators and educators. They're the ones that are pushing, and some activist groups that are pushing policies to actually eliminate advanced learning opportunities for students. And they say that they're doing it to make the classroom more equitable, and that the students that are privileged, that are socioeconomically privileged and hold whatever other type of privilege, will be fine, and they won't have any worse outcomes. But they're going to eliminate these courses for the students that are poor or lower on the socioeconomic ladder. The issue that they're not considering is that some of the students that are economically poor or disadvantaged actually are also academically gifted.
Shocking.
So when I talk about left-wing bigotry, I'm talking about that. Eliminating an honors course for a ninth grader for a kid who, like me, grew up very academically gifted and extremely poor just takes opportunity away. It's not equal, let alone equitable, to take those opportunities away from students who otherwise can't access them. Kids who grow up like my children, who are fortunate enough to have academic opportunities that if the school doesn't provide it for them, their parents can afford outside resources, maybe they'll be fine, right? Maybe those kids will be okay. But the kids who are academically gifted, but for whatever reason, whether they're poor, their parents aren't involved or whatever, can't access outside resources, the only thing those policies do is take away their opportunity. And to think that this is being done in the name of equity or in the name of helping Black and brown students is ludicrous.
And insulting.
Extremely insulting. I mean, it makes a few assumptions, and the biggest one that spells bigotry to me is the assumption that Black and brown students who may be socioeconomically disadvantaged aren't academically talented. It makes that assumption, and then makes policies that are damaging for all students based on that bigoted assumption.
Yeah, I mean, even again at the university level, we hear these kinds of things, where there's an anti-racist syllabi, and anti-racist.
What does that even mean?
I don't know. Look, I have tried to figure it out. I honestly have. I've looked. It's like, oh, it's got your office hours on it. It's got the due dates on it. It's got your policy absent. I'm like, who doesn't do that? There's nobody who doesn't do that. I don't
want to know that. What student? So I see that, and all of a sudden I'm so, into my Black fragility that I crack and break because I know when your office hours are, when you can.
Right.
Nonsense.
Yeah. And I mean, I've always had this policy where I don't accept late work. Now I will accept, students will come to me and say, oh, I need flexible deadlines. I'm like, that's great. I love getting things early. And they're like, it's not what I meant. But my point is that this doesn't do you any favors because it just pushes things out. Now you've got this big clump of stuff. You're already struggling. We're just piling things up, at the end of, at the end of the semester. We're just making it harder for you to keep up. So especially on these like small, low impact, assignments, look, you just get a 0 on that one. I dropped 2, just, whatever. And, if you have a legitimate reason, then, you let me know. But I think but there's a push for, everyone, we all have to be, flexible. We don't want any complaints. So we all have to be flexible on all deadlines. And I think that the pandemic made this worse, but I think that this is also being pushed through this umbrella of equity, that, it's so much harder now for students. I'm not sure what's harder now. I mean, to me, everything's.
Laugh at that. It's harder. Like there's like Google and stuff when I was in school.
I know. Now we got Chat GPT, for crying out loud. I mean, that's going to make it a heck of a lot harder on me. I don't think it's going to make it harder on them. But it's like now you put, not only do you have Google, but you got your calendar on your phone that says, you put it all in there, and your paper is due, in a week or whatever. You get a reminder, so you can have your teacher. I'm not sure what's harder, but yeah, everything seems harder. Everything seems triggering. Everything seems, that. So I don't know. I'm not sure.
I think it is harder if you have a group of people that have been coddled so much that they're unable to actually face adversity. And they have no resilience, or their resilience is low. And this isn't me pointing the finger at younger generations that may be the case. It's what made them that way. What adults put policies in place that actually don't build resilience, but do the opposite? Because that's what all of that does. And that's not preparing people, not just for the real world, but it's not preparing people to be healthy now, like while they're in college or even in high school and younger grades, to make their way through the world that we live in. Getting rid of resilience and responsibility really aren't recipes for success.
No, not in school, and not in any. And there's a big, huge meta-analysis where they followed people, 50 years of research. And one of the things that they find consistently swamps everything else in terms of success, and success measured by the amount of money that people make, and not going to jail, and those are kinds of whether or not you stay married, those kinds of things, those kinds of measures of success. So not just grades and stuff. Conscientiousness, over and over and over again, that swamps everything, is conscientiousness. So you get people who get a GED and people who graduated from high school. One doesn't necessarily, the people who graduate from high school still do better, even though they have the same credential. One of the reasons appears to be that people who end up having to get their GED maybe struggle with the social part, the sort of, just figuring out how to navigate showing up on time and turning things in on time. Just the what we would think of as the simple things in life, but those are people who are struggling with that, whether it's because of stuff going on in other parts of their lives, or simply because they haven't been held to account. Lots of possible reasons, but over and over and over again. So it's they just, again, there's a book this thick, 3 inches thick, on the research over 50 years, maybe even 75 now, because it's been a while. But this conscientiousness. So if we're going to build that, right, how can we build that if we're giving people a pass at every turn, or catering to fragility and excuse making? I just don't see how we can.
I don't either, but I also see that there seems to be a bit of a lack of trying to understand one another, and a hyper
Mhm.
focus on things that are, in my opinion, very inconsequential to living in a society. Like, we live in society. We're not off alone as hermits with our own rules. We live in society. And an example, I was watching the news this morning while I was getting my kids ready for school, and there was a story out of Texas that a young man was suspended from school and had been home for a number of days without access to his classwork or learning because of his hair. He had his
Oh, I
hair
saw that.
right.
Yes.
And I'm like, out of all of the things happening in
Right.
schools, the bigotry of suspending this kid because he is a black kid and he has his hair in locks and it's put up, and saying that it's too long because I think their rule was it can't go below the eyebrow or something, but his hair's up. It wasn't in his, you can't,
Right.
it wasn't long. It's like locked up.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a hyper focus on that instead of looking at, okay, what are the literacy rates coming out of that district? Are kids safe in school? Are they able to learn? What are instead of that, there's a hyper focus on something so silly as
Hmm.
one is natural hair, how it grows out of his head. So I don't know if, I mean, part of me wants to just laugh and say the silliness is because people need a
Right.
distraction, but it's actually harmful.
Yeah. And I agree. I mean, yeah, this sort of hyper focus on the minuscule, on an individual, again, like the whole lived experience, thing, I think has sort of built that. It's sort of baked in now, and everybody's focused on their screen. And I mean, look when we were did we spend this much time looking at ourselves? Ever? No, no. I mean, it's hard not to be overly self-conscious and overly consumed with the self when everything we do is focused on that, and instead, like you said, building resiliency and social skills, including conscientiousness. This is the kind of thing that we focus on. And um you know at the same time that, now of course that was in Texas, so that wouldn't, but we had similar issue here in Boston, where there were some girls in a private school and they had braids. They had the hair extension braids. And so it's a big deal about that. And it may have had to do with, they put the actual jewelry in, where the hair extension is, and it may have had to do with that. And they said that was like, I don't know, a private school. Much carrying on about that. So we have that, and then at the same time we get taught that you that if they weren't doing that, they would be acting white. So I've had college students tell me, like, oh, my friends, I told my friend I like this kind of music, and they said, well, that's not black enough.
Yeah.
They say that in certain classes, when we're talking about certain things, people feel free to share that a little bit more. Or people have told me privately, like, oh, I'm a student rep for something, and I think that something is ridiculous, but I'm not going to say it because I'm the black person. I'm supposed to be representing, that would be, and, I feel like that would be not acting black enough. So we have people who have braids, or they have, like you said, his hair, that's how it grows out of his head. I don't know. It's no wonder we're confused. The messages are pretty messy. So in your, I want to be respectful of your time here. In your class, you said there might be some readings, and can you tell us a little bit about? You said there's 4 classes, and are any of these topics that we've been we've been talking about going to be a part of the class or a part of the readings or anything?
Yeah, they will. I think that one, there's the idea of considering where your feet are planted when you're looking at something and forming an opinion on it. So there will be discussion, some activities where we try to shift a little bit, just to consider that how we've seen things or how we've been taught things may be part of the story, but not the entire story, and that's okay. And then when we're talking about a subject specific, like ethnic studies, to really consider framing and consider, see, this is where real cultural competency, I prefer cultural curiosity, comes into play, to consider that, okay, I've lived in this region, in this place, in this community, and that has shaped how I view things. It's quite easy to consider that somebody who lives in a different region and has had different experiences looks at things a different way. This isn't about one being true and one being false, where there's a situation when they both can actually be true. And to open up the conversation of an educator as a facilitator, a K-12 educator as a facilitator, not somebody who's supposed to impose her will or his will on their students, but they're supposed to open up opportunities for students to explore and question and express curiosity and build that into the classroom culture.
Is it okay if we talk about a couple of other things that were in your bio? I'm very interested in the in your work for victims of sexual assault. Can we talk about that for a few
Of
minutes?
course.
I know it's off topic, but
Of course. Yeah. So I worked as a victim advocate. I worked for three different branches of the military, where I helped victims of sexual assault, survivors of sexual assault, with a multitude of things, from crisis intervention, so getting sane sexual assault nurse examiner appointments and examinations, to legal proceedings like courts martial if their case went that way, to the investigative process, working with like NCIS and military investigators. That's mostly what I did with sexual assault victims and survivors, and I also did work with domestic violence victims and survivors. Similarly, safety planning, crisis intervention, working with military commands, and then, of course, providing training and awareness, education to different commands and individuals throughout that time, to raise awareness about the issue of domestic violence and sexual assault within the military, and figure out ways to take proactive steps to prevent those things from happening.
so I'm seeing lots of overlap between with the Masters of Ed and I'm sorry, the PhD in education and the Masters in social work. But you did those in the opposite. Did you do those in the opposite? Did you do the PhD first and then the social work?
No, I
Oh,
actually I did I have a few different master's degrees, but I did my MSW before I did my EdD
oh,
in
okay,
multicultural education. Yeah.
okay. And so, what made you go? What made you go back
To
and
school.
get your? Uh-huh.
I'm a professional student. I like learning. But
Hmm.
actually when I really operate in all the fields that I work in as a social worker. I think that education, that training, really applies to a lot of different fields when you're working with people. So I realized when I was doing a lot of victim advocacy that a lot of the training and education had to do with communication, and
Hmm.
looking at communicate. When I say, multicultural, international multicultural education, I'm not just talking about somebody's race or their skin color. It actually goes deeper than that. It becomes from, things like regional differences in communication style and understanding, and realizing how important that is to actually educate and communicate in a healthy and positive way. That's one of the things that made me go back and get my EdD.
It's interesting because I was fascinated because I started out in business and I got an MBA and then I got a master's in English and then I got a PhD in psychology, and I had the similar kind of feeling, which was that psychology for me sort of brought it all together. And
Mhm.
so I was that's why I was wondering about how you went through school, and what do you see? And so you almost see the social work as sort of the umbrella of under which all the other things fit. Yeah.
Sort of, yeah. I think that working with people, you have to have a level of awareness that social work, education and practice provides, or at least provided when I went to school. But also, working with the military and being part of a military family does that too, because you interact with people from everywhere.
Yeah. Is there anything else what haven't we touched on that you think might be important for people to know?
I'm not sure. I think we touched on a lot.
Okay. So I thank you again, and we will link to things. Oh, when's your course going to start?
Right, October 26th, Thursday will be the first date, and the dates and times will be listed on the ILB
So
website.
for 4 weeks, so it'd be 1 week apart, starting on October 26th. And for people who already saw the Xander Keeg video, Brandy again generously stepped into Xander's shoes and is going to do Xander's course is going to be postponed a little bit for reasons that are out of anyone's control, and Brandy generously decided to step in and move hers forward so we can take advantage of that, and then people will be people will be ready to they can think about these things and really ready to hopefully maybe implement some of the things that you've helped them think through, or that the group in general suggested for maybe their spring term in January. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks, Elizabeth.